that note about research. I really appreciated that because it has nothing to do with research like anyone else on the planet, I swear.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I work in a theater and dance department, and so all of the conversations about research, like there's traditional research like articles, but a lot of the research is, you know, a piece, a concert, a play, a choreography, whatever.
Isn't it wonderful? Yeah, I like that.
Very wide definition. I think it's wise to keep that in mind when we're talking about, you know, Fulbright.
I'm an archaeologist and an anthropologist by training, and I haven't published in a traditional way probably since 1990. And I regard when I get a group to tour or whatever, that is my publication.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's not in a book or a magazine or anything, but if I can say, you know, I brought the Chinle Valley Singers to China, check. That's it.
Yeah. Well, I think it's wise to separate the word research from the outcome of that research.
Yes.
You know, like saying that research has to end in a publication does not work for many of us. So,
yes. Oh. Got to calm down and be more mature here.
So we actually had 113 people register for this workshop.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give people a little bit of time, but I remember last time we had like 80 registered and about 30 showed up. So, you know, I know there will be a little bit of melt from that, but there's Zoe. Hi, Zoe.
Ooh.
She's a mute. Yeah.
All these people.
Hello, for real. Okay. Hi there. Sorry, I had another meeting that went right up until this one, but hello, everyone.
It's funny how you're like meetings back to back now, and it's like, we didn't do this before? Like, I don't even have time for bathroom breaks anymore, you know?
Exactly. Yes, that is the biggest problem.
Well, I could, of course, always quote my mother, who would have said, but we won't go there. She had a great sense of humor. She did.
We had a research symposium last week, and you know the schedule was 8 to 9, 9 to 10, 10 to 11, 11 to 1 kind of thing, up to 1 o'clock. And I realized many of us would be in, you know, concurrent sessions. So I said, can we have a 5-minute break? I need to get up, and you know, one needs to do all of that.
Yeah, exactly.
The restroom and the coffee. So that's how kind of, you know, we staggered and then kind of had a 5-minute break in between. But I don't know how people do that without a break, you know, for hours together.
Well, you know what it reminds me of,
honestly, get used to that.
Yeah.
What I want to know is when you see those pictures of people, you know, audiences of dictators like Stalin, and they speak for 6 hours. What did people do? Excuse me, Stalin, could you like hold 10 minutes? I've got it. I'll be right back. What did people do when the dictator of your country speaks for 6 hours? What did they do? Diapers? You know, I love it. That's a research project for somebody. Bodily functions in the age of dictatorial speeches.
Yeah.
There.
Yeah. Yeah, but normally at a conference, you know, you would have like some time to like walk down the hallway, and, you know, go to the bathroom on the way over, get a cup of coffee, whatever. And now there's this expectation that we're just like sitting in front of our computers all day. But
and there will be other people you would kind of not be missed, and now your face is right up there.
Yeah.
You know, you're sitting at the back of the room and you slip out. Nobody's going to know. Here, excuse me, they'll know. They'll know.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Well, I think we can get started. People will probably keep on trickling in, but you know, I always get a little nervous when I see like over 100 people registered, but I think like this is a good number right now. And thank you to all of you who came in and are muted. You're very welcome. I can't see most of you, but I imagine you're out there. Feel free to use the chat. I saw that Mia just asked if this will be recorded. So yes, I am recording this, and I will send around a link to the video after this discussion. I'll send it tomorrow morning, most likely, along with probably the chat transcript, because last time we had quite a few people put in some really gems of information into the chat, and you know, some other resources whatever comes up today. So thank you all for showing up. This is actually the second in a research workshop series about ethnographic methods on a Fulbright. And I know that we have a variety of people in here right now from various fields and disciplines, from various countries, who traveled to various countries for their Fulbrights, people who were on a Fulbright 20, 30 years ago, others that just got back, others that are still going, and others that want to go on a Fulbright at some point in the future. So we welcome all of the knowledge that everybody brings and all of the questions that that you may have about this kind of work. And it's really most exciting to me to see so many different fields and disciplines in here and so many different countries represented, because when I came up with this idea for the workshop series, of course, I'm just basing it on my own experience, which is as a dance anthropologist, and I was in Brazil in 2018. And that's just my perspective. And my approach to ethnographic work in terms of embodiment and basically dancing with people is what I do, and learn about culture from them through that experience. So it's very exciting to just hear from others, you know, from the sciences, from the social sciences, from the arts, from politics, government, all these different perspectives that you bring. So a little bit about Fullbridge. I'll pass it over to Zoe for a second to talk about what Fullbridge is and give us a little bit of background on where this workshop series idea came from.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, so Fullbridge is kind of the organization that's partnering with Kate to bring this awesome panel to you. And yeah, we are an organization that launched in 2015. We were created by a group of, at the time, current grantees. I'm the founder of Fullbridge.org. I was an English teaching assistant to South Korea during the time that I had the idea for this, this organization and this website. And the impetus behind Fullbridge was really that we saw a need for Fulbrighters from all different countries and going to all different host countries to connect with one another, to be able to expand each other's knowledge about the world. And there was really at the time, no easy way to do that. And so we continue to do active engagement activities that are aimed at this mission, and we actively aim to foster collaboration between Fulbrighters so that we can continue to learn from one another about all the places we've been and all the things that we're studying, et cetera. And so I can't really think of a better expression of both that mission, but also those kinds of activities than this workshop that Kate came up with when we were discussing it, I think a few months back now, which was very exciting. We've also joined with the Fulbrighter Network platform that I think many of you are probably familiar with, that launched in 2019, August 2019, in order to continue our mission and expand our reach. And so one thing I wanted to mention about that is that another opportunity with us is that we'll be making a research space within that Fulbrighter Network website, so that when it's completed, you'll be able to continue discussions related to this workshop through forums. You can access past workshops, whether of this series or of others, and maybe even start your own if that's something you're interested in. So we'll be sending out information about that once we have that completed and you all can access it. But yeah, that's about all I have.
Thanks. Yeah, this is really exciting. I know that when I was on my Fulbright, I wasn't really connected with other Fulbrighters at the time, even in the city that I was in with people at the same time. So it's just been really awesome to be able to connect with people, even if it's after the fact, on their experiences. And like I said, this is the second in this particular series about ethnographic methods. So the last workshop that we had was really a panel discussion where we talked. I just kind of wanted to get a feel for what people were interested in and where we were coming from and what were some of the issues that might come up. So we had a number of panelists. The first was Rachita Sood, who talked a little bit about, she comes from medicine and she went to India from the United States, and she was really looking at comparing the reality of the ground in hospitals in India to the theoretical discourse, and how she used ethnography and ethnographic perspectives to kind of work through those that research. And then we had Janet Robbins, who's an ethnomusicologist from the University of West Virginia, who talked about building long-term collaborations particularly in Recife, Brazil, and I was there at the same time that she was. I talked about my work really focusing on vulnerability in embodiment and kind of recognizing discomforts, physical discomforts, linguistic discomforts, all the challenges that one faces in a new culture. And navigating also privilege as a white woman coming with, all of this Fulbright money, what kind of privilege does that bring and how do you navigate that? We had two ETAs who also spoke. Amy Kuritsky was in Ecuador and actually had just come back early, having had her Fulbright cut short by the coronavirus pandemic. She talked a lot about that experience actually, which wasn't even kind of planned, but just what she went through and kind of being cut short. But also the connections between culture and scientific research, environmental research. And then Alana Harold, who was in South Korea, she was actually still there at the time during the workshop. And she was an ETA talking about how she was building a research project from her experience as an English teaching assistant in South Korea. So it was a really great discussion, and it brought up a lot of really important issues that I think we just scratched the surface of. And I wanted to review it for you now, just because I think many of you weren't there, to give you a sense of what we were talking about and where we kind of left it. Some feedback that we did get from that workshop included getting more input from researchers outside of academia. So I've invited Gordon, who was at that last workshop, to be a panelist today to give some of that perspective. And I think that others of us can also speak to that. Also including panelists from outside of the United States. I knew going into the last workshop that we were missing that crucial component. And so we definitely want to bring perspectives from, outside of American, US-based Fulbrighters going to other countries. We also want to give the perspective of those coming to the US. And also finally, leaving more time for group discussions. So today, we're just going to do a really quick round robin, like 5 minutes each for each of our panelists to talk a little bit about their research and specifically about observation and participant observation and how those elements of ethnographic method feed into their work. But then I want to just open up most of the time for us to talk in general about, what is on your mind, what questions you have. And if you have the agenda, I put the link in the chat. If you can't see it right now, I can put it in there again. I know sometimes if you come in late, you can't see. So let me know if you can't see it, just write in the chat if you can't see it. But there's some questions on there that'll kind of guide our discussion, but I'm open to going with the flow here. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to invite Gordon Barnitsky to speak first. Gordon is, where's his bio? He's had a number of Fulbrights over the years, as early as 1984 in Germany, also in Kenya and Zimbabwe, and he now has a firm called Barnitsky and Associates at indigenow.com, which is a firm that works with indigenous peoples from around the world in the performing arts. And he's worked on festival development in every continent except for Antarctica. So okay. Go ahead, Gordon, tell us a little bit about your work.
Well, I always tell, particularly my friends, that if you want to pronounce it right, it's indigenow, but okay. Yeah, I since 1995, I've had my business in which I do work with indigenous people around the world in the performing arts and festival development, bringing mostly American Indian performers overseas, bringing mostly indigenous performers here or some other country. I have a traditional Navajo dance group that's been overseas 12 times, but I also help produce an indigenous theater festival in London, a summer of American Indian events, traditional and contemporary in Austria. And that means that the kind of research I do is, I think, really different. And my answers to the questions that are going to guide us are really very different than anyone else. Because first of all, whenever I go overseas or the group I work with goes overseas, we're there because somebody wants us. And usually we've worked for 9 months or a year to get us there. So we're not just, happen to be in the neighborhood and thought we'd drop in. And so that's part of it. It means that, again, People want us there, either the US Embassy or a festival or something like that. If I'm working particularly with a US Embassy, it means there is somebody there. There's usually a State Department person. There may be an interpreter there. They may have set up my schedule and told me sort of, this is what we'd like you to do. And then I work to find out what's going on. One of the things that I do, for instance, the first thing I try to learn everywhere I go is how to say why not in the local language. It lets me use my hands, it breaks the humor, and it also tells people what I do want to do. And it is handy if I'm saying, maybe we could have a festival here next year, and then I can say in the local language, why not? People laugh and it breaks the ice, and that's a very good thing. I deal with the fact that I'm not from there, wherever there is. By, for instance, a question I often ask people, I'll tell them, you know more about your country, your group, your ethnic group, whatever it is, infinitely more than I ever will. And I'll joke, you speak your native language like a native. And then I'll say something like, is there someone in your community, country, city, whatever, who did something that made you say, wow, that's good? And I say to them, you notice, I didn't say traditional, I didn't say contemporary, I didn't say visual art, I didn't say performance, because you are the expert and I want to know. And frankly, people like that a lot, because I think indigenous people are often used to being asked, tell me about wife beating or alcoholism or poverty or land loss. And those, I'm not, those are serious issues, but that's not what I deal with. I'm asking them, what's their thing about your community that you really think is amazing? I mean, that's how I got in touch with a Navajo heavy metal band. I asked them, you talk to these people. Got them invited to Botswana, but we didn't get the money. But, and so that's part of what I do and how I do it. I take advantage of the fact that I'm not from there. I tell Native people, I'm not a Native person. I don't pretend to be one, and I don't play one on TV. And they all laugh. And I say, that means Native people choose the message. If that message is a traditional Navajo dance group, an Aboriginal Australian rock band, a Navajo designer, and I've worked with all three, I said, that means my job is not to tinker with the message and add feathers and make it look cute. My job is to turn up the volume. And so I say, essentially, I'm the sound tech guy. And people like that. I mean, for instance, this Navajo dance group, I showed them how you go on stage. I showed them how you take a bow. I showed them how you go off stage, which is different issues. But, if I ever told them what to perform, they would all hurt me. And these are all women who know how to butcher a sheep. I am not getting them on my bad side, not those people. So that's part of it. I don't know if you want me to continue or you'd like to bring someone else on at this point, but you're in charge of the schedule.
Sorry, I was muted. I think that's a great start. Let's move on so we keep the conversation going, but we'll come back to this. And again, I mean, I think I think that we were talking about this before most people came on, but we're talking about, research outside of academia as having an outcome besides a publication, right? And so how we work with groups on, producing a concert or a festival or piece of choreography or, all these other ways that we can think about an outcome of Fulbright research and what are we really trying to, accomplish in various ways. And in some ways, the accomplishment may be relationships, right? And I think that's really central to what we're talking about today. In terms of participant observation, we're participating and observing in order to form relationships. So let's move to Padmini Borua. Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, almost. I'm just joking. You're doing a good job.
Okay, great. And Padmini is here in the US right now in San Diego, visiting from Guwahati University in India. And her research is in English language teacher education and action research.
Yeah, thank you, Kate. That's my background, English language teacher education. And I come from India, which is a multilingual country, as you all know. It has multiple cultures and languages and traditions. So I already am in a space that looks at, various perspectives. Life has taught us, experience of being an Indian is like, you accept difference, you accept variety, you accept diversity, and that's a part of our everyday lives. But when you do research, for example, I realized, that you need to be really, you need to come from a place of humility. You need to come from a place of absolutely no judgment. And that is the one thing that I suppose we would all, bring into the research experience. Gordon pointed out, we are outsiders. I cannot pretend to be an insider. And that's a good place to begin. I'm an outsider, and I'm there because I want to learn. So I feel that we, begin from a point of surprise, and I'm amazed. I'm surprised at many of the things that I see, and from surprise, comes curiosity. So if I'm surprised by something, I want to know more about it, and from curiosity we move on to learning. So that's the pathway that I like to take. So I like to do it like, accept that I'm an outsider and I'm there to learn, and there's so much to learn. And I also feel that it's the bigger things are there already. Festivals and rituals and the larger stuff that's already there. But what actually helps is getting to know the small things, the small little things about what the community feels is of value in their everyday lives. An example of how for like this is in many Middle Eastern cultures, for example, it's respectful to share food from the same plate. But if you were to go to an Indian Hindu household, we would never do that. That would be extremely disrespectful, because touching someone else's food is kind of it's unhygienic, so you would never do that. There are caste issues as well, but that's a different play. The fact, what I'm trying to say is that the awareness of what is valued in a culture, in the small things of everyday life. I suppose if as a researcher, I have to take that perspective and I get in. So my research here is on English language teacher education. And when I came last year in 2019, I co-taught a course on working with refugee refugee student populations. And the project is developing critical consciousness in teacher candidates as they support refugee background learners. Now, while doing that, because I was new, I decided that I needed to understand more about the context in which the research was going to happen. So even though I did not become a participant observer as part of the research, I kind of went into the field as an auxiliary, making it an auxiliary element. I realized I would only learn what happens there if I were to get into the actual situation there, and that's how I began. So I'll talk more about it later. I think you might want to have someone else speak about their experiences now. So thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I love this idea of the surprises and the little things that come up. And I think that's something that, Fulbright and any kind of international research gives us this opportunity to live in a new place. And I was just talking with a colleague earlier today about, noticing something while I was standing in line at the grocery store or something like that. And like that set off some epiphany for me that related to my research, but I might not even have remembered if I hadn't, noticed and then written it down later. And, just keeping a journal in many ways is just a good way to, remember those things and they come back later. And it's always a question that I ask my students when I'm teaching ethnography. It's like, tell me what surprised you. That's the first question, right? So yeah, so I love that. So let's give Lonika Wilkinson-Baptiste an opportunity to speak now. Lonika is an assistant professor of music education at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. She was in Recife, Brazil, the same city that I was in, but a year later. So we've never actually met, but we've talked. And we were both studying a music tradition while we were there, but different. So she was a postdoctoral teaching and research fellow at the Universidade Federal de Pernambuco, and her area of study was Coco de Roda, which is a local tradition.
Yes. So, hi, everyone. In my area is music education, more specifically in culturally responsive teaching, which is working with students in ways that are congruent with the culture they're from. A part of, connected to that, we do a lot with world music pedagogy. For a very long time in our field, we've had an idea that we should use music from a variety of cultures, but we found that the way that it's done isn't always respectful. It can promote stereotypes that we're saying we're trying to work against. So something new has emerged, world music pedagogy, where we look at the ways in which music is taught and practiced and understood in a variety of settings, and look at music being taught and understood from that perspective to the extent that we can. The research that I do is very much about placing music in its context, social context, political context, cultural context, understanding the influences that led to its development. What is the place of this music? Is it respectful to practice, to sing this music? Should we just learn about it? Should we not participate in certain activities? So that's the area that I study. And when I was looking to do a Fulbright, I knew I wanted to study somewhere else. And Brazil had the opportunity where it should be someone who had very little experience with Brazil. That would be me. And it was very much a shock in a number of ways. It was a very different cultural context from, to be honest, it was more like a parallel universe. Like there were some things that were very, very familiar. And then there were other things that I had trouble understanding. And then having conversations and understanding social developments, how those things have impacted life, they were really important. So in the participant observation part of it, at times I felt, and I always knew that I was struggling to communicate. I didn't speak Portuguese when I applied and got the fellowship, and I started learning about 9 months before I went. So I'm there basically learning on the ground. So there was obviously that. But at times I really felt at home. I felt that people were embracing me and wanted to share with me, and they trusted me to represent their culture honestly and with integrity. And that meant a lot to me, which made me feel even more of a responsibility to do that. The outcomes of that for me, it's gonna be publications, but in addition, it's discussing these at workshops, working with students, constant communication, making sure that I'm representing, that I'm understanding everything as they would want me to. But also it got cut short because, we're gonna have to delay it because of the pandemic we're going through. But establishing a program, an exchange program between the university here and the university there. So we'll have students go there, and then the next summer students will come here. I'm also working to have further programs with music in the schools, in the community, because there were some issues that came up there. And another thing that made it very interesting for me that impacted the way that I participated there, not just in the sambadas or the street parties or sometimes streets, sometimes at different centers that I went to. Outside of that, I brought a 1-year-old with me by myself. So I'm there, I'm learning the language, and there's a 1-year-old. There were certain things that I had to do there that I would not have had to do otherwise, such as enroll him in daycare, such as have they never really told me the name that they use. I've heard the name faxineira used, but have someone come in and watch my son, and some issues that were difficult for me to navigate with the ethics of that. So it brought up a whole lot of other things. So the participant observation happened for me in those settings that I was seeking to understand, but also throughout. Like I was living with some friends' parents, my friends' aunts. So I'm in the neighborhood. So I'm meeting people. They say, "Oh, you're the one with the little boy. Oh, yes, I see you walk by here all the time." So now I'm just in a short period of time, I'm getting into the neighborhood, speaking to the same people every day. They're asking about my son. How is he doing? I didn't see him with you this time. So that's how That's my experience.
Yeah, I think that that personal life aspect is something that, you know, I don't know that we think about it so much when we're writing up our proposal, right? And then we
Yeah.
get there and it's like, oh, right. Like, I mean, I had to find an apartment 2 weeks after I arrived in Recife because, you know, it didn't work out with the first one. And I remember in a previous project before my Fulbright, it was really important to like get to know people, and like you were saying, oh, you recognize that you're the one with the son, and like I was working with people's kids in a school, like teaching them dance, and it was just like, you know, you don't have the same access to people without certain just personal connections, right? And just getting to know people's lives, which I think is really valuable. So thank you, all three of you, for giving us a little warm up on some of the, I think we already brought up like a bunch of topics that we could really dig into. And I just want to remind you all that, you know, I've invited these panelists as, you know, experts in their fields to talk about their perspectives, but I consider all of us to be experts in our own fields. And so now I want to open up this discussion just to everybody, to share your experiences, ask your questions, and just, you know, it's really an open forum. And I think I'll start the discussion just by asking one of the questions that's on the agenda. It's actually towards the bottom, but what does participation look like for you in your research?
Oh, you're asking us.
Yeah, anybody can answer.
Well, for me, again, given that I'm rather different than most of the other people here, participation means being there, meeting people, hearing what they're doing, and again, being clear about what I am and what I'm not. As an example, particularly when I meet Native people, Indigenous people, one of the things I'll tell them up front, I'm a middle-aged white Jewish guy. And I tell them, that's your best insurance that I'm not going to screw you. Because you're a Native performer. If I screw you, everyone is going to hear about it in 10 minutes. And there goes everything I've ever wanted to do. So, I'm clear about what I am and what I'm not. And I participate as an outsider who thinks they have something to offer, who thinks they have a message that's worth turning up the volume for. Dead silence.
I agree, and I think it's so much to do with listening before speaking. And I like to think of being a participant observer as doing of being there, becoming, and belonging. That's how I look at it. You cannot completely become one, but then you want to become a part of it as long as you're there, and without making people feel threatened in any way by your presence. And one thing that you can't do is you cannot change the way you look, because you do look different mostly. You stand out, you can't help that. So rather than trying to blend in, I think it's completely all right to be just who you are, and that is appreciated. And to admit that you don't know much, you're here to learn. And with my experience of working with these young people and after school tutoring hours, I found that they were very curious that I was from India, and several of them played me Bollywood songs, Hindi movie songs, and they said, "Do you know this?" So that was their kind of I loved that, because it made me gave me a space to enter into their worlds. And I ended up talking about books, and then this was a group of African children from African backgrounds, and I said, "What are the kinds of books in your own language that you read?" And they said they didn't have any. And I looked up on Amazon, and I found this first book that I saw. It was a book in a language called Kinyarwanda. And I said, "Is this the kind of book you guys like to read?" And they said they were very enthusiastic. So I actually got a copy. And after that, I think we became friends. It was much later that I realized that the book was all about love and sex. I had no idea what it was about, but the kids loved it, and I got it from them. And then I had children from different language backgrounds coming and wanting to read it. And they were, arguing, I want to read it first. The other one says, no, I want to read it first. Why? How can you read it? You don't speak the language. And then this child says, oh, I speak 5 languages. When we talk about culturally responsive pedagogy, it's amazing, what the funds of knowledge that these children have, they bring to their own learning. It's amazing how the discussion of one book triggered so many different kinds of conversations. I feel, that's one way of letting the conversation flow. It's making people comfortable with who you are and, how you look at them. I think this kind of works for me as a in-participant observation.
Yeah, I think I did. And from my experience, it was really different because I didn't realize that I would fit in, as I would blend in as much as I did, until I opened my mouth and nobody guessed that I wasn't from Brazil. And when I did talk, they would say, oh, you must be from Angola. And I kept saying, why does everybody think I'm from Angola? So then I said, oh, but then I figured out, oh, wait, they speak Portuguese in Angola. So, okay, I must be doing all right. It was establishing that relationship with the community was really important for me as well. The children were very excited when they learned that I was from the United States, and they wanted to hear me say their names as they would be said in English. And then they would just start sharing with me about what I was seeing. They would tell me the history of it, and they would tell me what I was about to see. They would hold and watch my son while I'm taking pictures and taking videos. And the parents would come in and they would say, no, I know you did this, but you have to participate in this too. You have to do this. They were very hands-on. And also I was in an Afro-Brazilian community. And one of my friends who's Brazilian told me, I asked her, what issues might I face? And she said, you will probably be welcomed in a little more in that community because you are of African descent. And I found that they were extremely welcoming to me. So when we're examining who we are before we go into a setting, sometimes our assumptions may be completely off, because I knew I was just going to stick out like a sore thumb. And again, nobody knew that I wasn't Brazilian until I opened my mouth.
Yeah, I think this is this kind of relates to the point here about positionality and how we position ourselves. How we introduce ourselves. What do we say about ourselves when we arrive? And for me, I identify first and foremost in terms of what I do as a dancer, and secondly as a dance scholar, because I've been a dancer for much longer. And so when I go and I'm doing a research project, I go into a community. That's one of the best ways for me to connect. There may be a linguistic barrier, there may be a cultural barrier, but I can always say, oh yeah, like that, my background is in Irish step dance, and I can say, oh, a similar kind of thing happened in the history of Irish dance. Like, what are the similarities? What are the differences? Like, it's been a really great way for me to connect, and I feel like that there's kind of a shared respect, like a tacit understanding that we'll sweat together. I've said this before, I said this in the last workshop, but part of my methodology is sweaty struggles, like just getting up and like sweating with people, dancing with them, and showing that you're willing to kind of try and even fail, right, in order to learn something new about a culture that is so important to them. And it does become very, very personal in that way.
See, for me, when I work, I'm overseas usually no more than 2 weeks at a time. I go there, I do them, and it's only 2 weeks. And I know what I want to do. I know that I may not do it. And I personally found humor really helpful. If I could use an example, let's say, I'll show you what I do that breaks down those barriers quickly and in a good way. Let's say I was working in India and Padmini asked me where I was from. I would probably say, I'm from Tamil Nadu. And they'll say, you can't be from Tamil Nadu. Clearly I'm not. And I'd say something like, well, I'm speaking Tamil right now. That's probably why you don't understand me. I have such a heavy accent in my Tamil. And we go on. And I might say something, I'd say, you mean my parents lied to me? I'm not from Tamil Nadu? And it's quick and it's fun. It shows that I know enough about the country. If I was in Brazil, I'd probably say I was from Paraguay. And then, of course, they know and we go on. But to break the to break in and with a sense of humor to show I know enough about the country to know there is a Tamil Nadu, and get people laughing. And then I said, let's start doing it. Let's see what you like and where can we go, and let's do it. Works for me.
Yeah, this segues a little bit into like questions about interviewing, which is the topic of the next workshop, date to be announced. But yeah, how we connect with people in an interview, and what are some approaches that we take in talking to people in both formal interviews and also informal conversations. I'm getting some chats here, so I just want to read. Kelly is a design researcher and works at the intersection of design thinking and civic design. And is saying that empathy is a key component of this process. So I can't see Kelly on my screen, but Kelly, if you'd like to speak, we'd love to hear from you. But this looks like a great resource for looking into what is called emancipatory research.
Hi.
Hi, Kelly.
Yeah, I have like 100 rollers in my hair, so I'll spare that. But yeah, so I just recently transitioned into the design field because I realized design thinking has a lot of innovative tools at the intersection of research, qualitative and both quantitative research. And this resource, and Dr. Leslie Knoll, she has toolkits that you can download, and some that are free, some that you can buy if you want, but it's all free, but mainly just really getting into digging deeper as a researcher and really grounding yourself in that socio-cultural context. And even for me, it's really also too getting at systemic issues, societal structures. A lot of the work I do currently is in Detroit, and at the intersection of looking at structural racism that has also led to political outcomes and government services and disproportionate delivery related to those things. So I just thought in this conversation, I would like to ask if people outside of the design world are familiar with design thinking, come from a place of empathy, have used it previously, and just wanted to share those resources and just throw it out there.
Yeah, thank you. Heather here says that she's a theater professional and researcher, and that empathy is central to her work. I know it's also central to mine. In dance research, there's a term, kinesthetic empathy, which is this research about mirror neurons and how we connect with other people, how we create empathetic relationships. I don't know if Heather would like to jump in and say more about her work.
Sure. Yeah, I came in a little late, so sorry. But I actually just got back from my work in France, in the south of France, in Aix-en-Provence and in Marseille, working with migrants in those regions, and we were doing basically applied theater techniques with them, and there were a lot of language barriers because most of the migrants, French was not their first language. Like, it's not my first language. But one of the really interesting things that I discover is through these applied theater techniques, such as Theater of the Oppressed, Augusto Boal's work, and the work that was done with Michael Rohde and his Hope is Vital workshops. Anyway, the thing that I realized is that you can reach empathy without language using these techniques a lot. And it really surprised me even how much faster people are willing to open up about who they are when they don't have to speak it, when they don't have to say the words, but they can gesture it or emote it or interact with each other, what they're trying to communicate. And so and then of course that creates not only like the communication becomes a little bit more malleable and less rigid and more playful, which again opens up people to sharing and to offering their insight that you can't always get just with formal interviews or quantitative research methods. So a lot of the work that I was doing was really around journaling and watching and observing in that space where people have the ability to relax a little bit and to know that they're all we're all in that tiny little communita, and we can create that almost like a tiny little utopic vision of futures together in that space. And again, I just got back, so like there's so much that's still processing in my brain, and then COVID hit. So I've just been like, I'm really grateful to kind of already, I'm supercharged by just hearing what everybody was saying for the last like 5 minutes that I've been able to be on here. So thank you for organizing this.
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about this issue a lot lately too, because right now we're not like, it's not the same interaction with people anymore. Like normally I'd be like reading people's body language and like, connecting with people in different ways. And like, I'm supposed to teach a dance ethnography class in the fall. And I'm like, okay, well, we can take some classes online, but like, it takes away that experience of actually standing in front of somebody and like breathing the same air, which right now is like the most horrific thing to think about. But yeah, I mean, I think that participant observation, participation, and interviewing really go hand in hand. Like doing one without the other doesn't work.
I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I was looking into the emancipatory research and just briefly finding what I could to think about that. And the idea was a little, it talked about the relationship between the privileged researcher and those who it says research subjects from traditionally marginalized or oppressed groups such as the economically disadvantaged. And while I understand that those relationships tend to exist, I think for me, it was a very different experience because as I was talking with them, I was basically in awe of their connection to their African history more so than the average African American might have here. So that was a point of awe for me. And also many of the issues they're facing, I face those as well, and my community faces those as well. So that was always an underlying theme for working towards social justice from the beginning because of, I would say, I guess that was a part of the position that I have, my positionality, because it's something that I've seen, that I've worked with, that I discuss on a regular basis. So that was just inherently a part of it, but I didn't think about it as a process. It was something that was just an underlying way of thinking, if that makes any sense. I'm not sure if I'm.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I was also in history, and I was really challenged by, completely different ways of using language. And it wasn't like a translation issue per se, but more like specifically I was working with improvisation and using the word improviso in Portuguese, which has a very negative connotation actually as being kind of racist or classist. And it really took me some time to wrap my head around the different ways that Brazilians specifically in this area were thinking about that term, which in the arts, in the performing arts, is like, oh, improvisation, this is the best thing ever, everybody does it, and we all assume it's, a tool that's used to create art. But it became something very negative when I was, talking to people using that language. It wasn't landing the way that I thought it would. And similar with other concepts that I came in with and assumptions that I had based on my experiences in the United States.
I really like this term, the curse of knowledge, that you make so many assumptions when you try to communicate to people that you think that people are thinking like you, and that becomes a problem when you try to communicate. And language is certainly a big issue. For me, it's not so much about speaking a different language in the community in which I was working, but in using a different variety of the same language. Indian English is a variety that is not, it is very similar, but also very different from American English. So all these, the kids that I was working with, they all come from a variety of different cultural backgrounds, but they are all kind of, speakers of American English. They've been here in the United States for, maybe 4 years or 5 years. Some have just arrived, but they are all, speaking American English. And I realized that I had to be very careful in what I said, because the way in which we use English is, sometimes very different. For example, I remember coming into my university here, and I asked somebody, "What accommodations do you have?" And the person didn't quite understand what I was saying, because in India the word accommodation would mean housing, and here the word accommodations it means something so different. So it took me a while to understand that the same word has, a different connotation, and how I spoke and what I said made a huge difference to the meaning that I was trying to convey, or the question that I was trying to get a response to. So I've made so many faux pas, and I kind of laugh at it. I say, please correct me, because I've said things like, native Indians eat spicy food. Now, for me, I'm a native Indian. It has a completely different meaning than the word that's here. So I had to learn all of this. And then in India, we say things like, "When did you pass out?" I don't know whether you know that. Now that means graduating. When did you graduate? For some reason, we use the word pass without. I don't use it myself, but a lot of us do. And these are points these are points where confusion arises, but then these are also points in which, humor can be used. And I love the way Gordon talks about the use of humor to break down these, these barriers between people that we are trying to communicate with. So communication, and especially linguistic aspects, are also, something that we really need to be mindful about when we are in the community, trying to learn from them.
Well, one of the things that I found really with language in particular, either I'll ask somebody how I should behave or what I should say, or if I've made a mistake and they tell me, what I tell them and what works for me is, thanks for letting me know. I say, if I want to insult somebody, I want to do it on purpose, not because I was too stupid to know any better. People laugh and we move on. And I've learned what to say, and it's very good for me.
Yeah, I think as researchers, as Fulbrighters, which is, pretty prestigious, right? We come into these projects wanting to do a good job, right? And I think that in a lot of ways, like the fear of failing, of making a faux pas, of saying something wrong, could maybe in some ways kind of, make us feel uncomfortable with moving forward with the work and making mistakes. And so I think what you all are saying about, being able to laugh at yourself is really critical. Lanika, you were going to speak.
Yes, I was going to say with the language part, I found that people were very helpful, and they really liked the fact that even though I couldn't speak Portuguese very well, that I was trying, and I would ask questions. And I also, every now and then, to the extent that I could, I would use humor with my limited Portuguese. I can understand it better than I can speak it. So I would let somebody go through this long spiel after a talk, and they'll ask this long question, and they'll ask me, what do I think? And I'll say, I didn't understand anything. And then everybody starts laughing, and then, but then they really think I didn't understand it, and they'll start trying to explain it again. But, that was the way that I tried to use humor. And I see that there was a question from Sandra that how might I explain in the application part for my research that I plan on using intuitive measures, embodied knowledge, like Kate is talking about, embodied knowledge in the sense of your body understanding, your body receiving the information or sharing. Is that the question?
So I think you had mentioned that, like, when you were talking about how, since you were in a community with with Afro-Brazilian people, some of the things that you were working on with them, didn't really have to do a lot of I suppose apple picking to find out how to phrase those things because you've experienced them yourself, and you know that from a different you know the experience from a different perspective, so you also know how to like present the question in a way that shows that you are doing it as well, or that you are having this experience as well. So I was wondering how you might explain that methodology in like a proposal, because to me it kind of is a little bit like it's not intuitive at all to explain intuition in that way, like to explain that, you know, I'm going to use the felt, you know, experiences that I have in my community, or like how Kate is describing, like as a dancer, I'm going to use my embodied knowledge. I'm going to use the things that I have, you know, within my physical arsenal to like reading body language and things like that. Like, how might you explain that? Because it's a little bit lofty, I suppose.
Honestly, I'm not exactly sure. It's not something that I put into the proposal, mainly because I didn't realize that it was going to happen that way. So I'm not sure, other than drawing on similarities between my experience and the things that I saw, and how I felt the connection with those. But other than that, honestly, I haven't thought about it very much.
Yeah, Sandra, I think that being able to use some of the dance research on, you know, how we connect empathetically. So for example, what I mentioned before, kinesthetic empathy, I'll put it in the chat. It's by Reynolds and Reason is the name of the authors. And, you know, even just referring to kind of methodological work like that in your proposal, I think could really strengthen, because, you know, maybe the reviewer on the Fulbright committee that's reading your proposal doesn't understand, you know, dance research, ethnographic research. And so being able to say that, you know, I have training in, you know, picking up movement from other people, you know, in various contexts, in a studio, with choreography, and just in everyday life, you may be more attuned to body language, I think is a really important means of gathering data. I mean, for me, it is, as a dance researcher, right? I pay attention to those things. Even if I'm not like writing down every little gesture, you're attuned to it. You get a sense of what people are trying to communicate by paying attention to those things. So I think that's something that's important to spell out explicitly in this kind of research, that this is what you've done.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Talking about the language component, I wanted to say that in my research study, I also faced translation issues when trying to communicate to participants of my research study. My name is Dilnora, and I come from Uzbekistan. I have graduated with a master's degree this May in health and risk communication from Michigan State University, where I'm currently in Lansing, Michigan, because I'm trying to, I'm waiting for my international flight to take me home. What I'm trying to say is my interest lies in infectious diseases, specifically in hepatitis B, which is prevalent in the Asian and African continent throughout the world. Uzbekistan is also endemic for chronic hepatitis B. If you know, if untreated chronic hepatitis B can cause cirrhosis and liver cancer, and in the United States, a lot of Asian immigrants and African immigrants are disproportionately affected by chronic hepatitis B, and they do not know they have the disease until they come to the US. In my research study, what I did, I sat in and conducted participant observation at a community health center. I observed how family members, Asian immigrants, and the healthcare provider tried to communicate about chronic hepatitis B. So I had very interesting findings from these observations, but I could really see the whole picture by comparing how the same healthcare provider communicated not only with Asian immigrants, but also with other patients who had HIV, who had diabetes, who had hepatitis C, and were of different ethnic and racial background. So quite an interesting research study. So I had a difficulty. Well, because I did not receive a lot of funding to do my research, I depended on family members of Asian immigrants who came for their medical appointment. So, and as I assumed I could not complete my data because of COVID events, but all of my participants came with their family members because in all cases, Asian immigrants could not speak English well, so they depended on their either a daughter or a son who provided translation during this appointment. So I had a difficulty understanding, and I could really see that the family member played a key role in providing this translation and also educating a patient with chronic hepatitis B about the disease. I wonder if, I came across some ethical issues, and I wonder if anyone in this group did, besides doing participant observation, could also do intervention. For instance, last year I worked as a case manager, as a patient navigator, and I linked patients, postnatal women who gave birth to children but have chronic hepatitis B to care and treatment. And I also worked in Michigan at the Department of Viral Hepatitis. So besides, first I would observe, and then I would ask questions. And then if I see that there were missing parts, especially in education, I would do intervention and provide education to patients and family members. I wonder if you also conduct interventions during your participant observation or following your participant observation.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, you know, in my kind of research, I would try to do as little intervention as possible because of the nature of my research, you know. But I think in the medical field, right, there's a very different purpose, right, to the research. So I'd be interested to hear if anybody else uses ethnographic methods outside of like cultural research per se, for these means. I mean, for these ends.
I guess we're talking about communication is our focus right now. Is that right, Kate?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. It helps to, I think a lot of the communication is just being in touch with the people. Sometimes you may not understand each other exactly, but you got your heads together in a sense that there's a common love, or whatever you want to call it, where there's just a work at understanding. It's just saying, well, you ask them what this is, they know you're asking a question, and so they try to answer, and after a while, a lot of it's demonstration. My work is in traditional agriculture, and I've done a lot of different works there. I got my Fulbright was to go to Mozambique, but prior to going to Mozambique, I had worked 3 years in Brazil, so my Portuguese worked out pretty well there. And but in many of the tribal people were very weak in their Portuguese, but that's the only way we could talk. And so I was visiting farmers and staying out with them, finding out why they did this and this sort of thing. And so it would just keep repeating questions, and often they were very happy to communicate in whatever way you could. And over a period of time, maybe a repetition, that I would figure it out, and they would too. So just, I think that's, I'd have to say, and if someone has a question.
Yeah, I mean, I think language is probably one of the biggest challenges that many of us face when we are on our Fulbright, you know, learning a new language and dealing with, you know, trying to communicate in various ways. And I'm looking at the chat and all these nuances of how to communicate. What if somebody wants to practice their English with you, or, you know, whatever country you're from, somebody wants to practice your language, instead of giving you an opportunity to practice your language skills. You know, do we email versus call people? I mean, these are all really great questions that are very culturally based. I actually have a question that I want to ask is, has anybody had an experience where participation was not appropriate, and how you dealt with that? Like if you felt like it was really important to your research to participate in something, but you felt that you shouldn't for some reason, or that you knew that you shouldn't participate from the beginning, but how you still incorporated that into your research in some way.
I can think of one time. Just about everything that I went to, it was a participatory music making event, or it was at the university where I was in a lecture or I was expected to respond. But I did go to a service at a Tejero. It was of the Shango religion, which is Candomblé, the name they have for it in that area. And I was made aware ahead of time that I had to wear a dress, which I don't wear, and I'd only brought one. I had to wear a dress, and there were certain things happening in the middle, but I needed to stay toward the outside. I wasn't a part of the religion, so I could observe. And I didn't, in an effort because I wanted to be respectful, I didn't do anything like try to have interviews or take pictures. Even though they told me that I could, I just observed what I could and did notes on my recorder later on about it. And I went back several times later, and then they would give me tours and tell me what was happening and what was happening during each part, so I could get more detailed information after the fact. But in the moment, I just tried to experience it as much as possible.
Well, usually the people I work with set pretty clear boundaries, and basically if they don't want me to see something, I'm not going to be there. I won't even know about it. But they're also good at it. I brought this Navajo dance group to Manila, and there was a big festival. And I was always proud because the festival asked if they would bless them in a Navajo way. And the Navajos said, we will, but we're going to set the ground. No photography, no applause, no recording, or no us. And I always liked that. They were perfectly capable of telling people what was acceptable, yeah, we'll bless it, and what was not acceptable. And the people I've worked with have generally been really strong that way. There are a lot of other examples, but that's a good one.
One of the things that I've run into is this kind of their own tribal religion, things like that. You never know exactly what you might be doing that might be offensive. And I had one time this wasn't in my Fulbright experience, but this was in another country where I've been working in a village there. But what I had done is I got a GPS machine, and I went and did some measurements in their garden areas, and they were a little bit hesitant about it, but they didn't say too much. But what happened then, I finished out, went back to the main city, and then a week later I returned again, and they had just had this terrible flood, and it was right where I was doing this work. And they said I had insulted the ancestors, and that's why they had the flood there. And they had to spend a year without food. They had to find other famine food to eat at that time period. But it's, the flood was blamed on my machine, and so that was unexpected altogether. But it was just maybe by now they may have realized that it wasn't that wasn't the cause. It was just naturally. This was on a floodplain. They normally get floods there anyway, but this was a huge one and wiped out their entire crop. So I felt pretty bad about that.
Yeah, I mean, we were just talking about how, we should be able to laugh at our mistakes and kind of brush it off, but sometimes, there are much larger consequences to, what we might do or what we might be seen as influencing the events in certain ways.
I think taboos and superstitions in any culture are things that are usually a red flag, and it always helps to understand and know beforehand some of the things that, for example, women in certain cultures are allowed to do, men in certain cultures are not allowed to do, or any sort of such things. And even though we do not agree with superstitions, it's amazing, you know, how cultures look at superstitions. Even the most educated people do have certain inherent beliefs, probably as part of being a part of a culture, that might, you know, sometimes get into the way. So understanding taboos and superstitions is a really good, you know, beginning point. One example I could give of my country is, you know, you might, if you were to, and it's religious, if you were to want to go and study something inside a temple, a Hindu temple, if you were a woman, you would never be allowed. I mean, most temples, I shouldn't say all, most temples do not allow that are menstruating people, women with periods, are not allowed to go into a temple when they are in their period. And so that's something that most Hindu temples would take very seriously. The other thing is, you know, covering your head. A lot of religions also believe in that. So knowing these small things, because then you do, you know, just as our friend pointed out, you might find yourself being blamed for things that are natural or much beyond your control. You have no control. But then superstition is something that is difficult to fight.
And knowing about what people want is good. This Navajo group I work with, I know, just as an example, whenever we go overseas, I say, is there a place where they can buy fabric? Because they love that. But I also say, if there is an ocean there, they would like to go there to pray. And can that be arranged? And they like it because once I went, I think it was in Dubai, and we went to the ocean, and the person I was with said, now we can see what they do. And I said, no, now is the time we take a walk down the beach. And we don't do that. We give them the privacy they want to pray. And that helps me.
Yeah, and I think in these cases, this is where, you know, observation and tuning in is probably more valuable than participant observation, right? We talk about both of these methods. Sometimes you really do need to just step back and observe and listen and kind of wait until you know how to behave. And like, we're all going to make mistakes, right? But you know, there's
nothing to get you killed.
Right, hopefully. Yeah, I mean, I grapple with this question about whether it's appropriate for me to participate or not all the time in dance. You know, I learn a lot of dances from other cultures, and they have certain specific meanings. They might be cultural meaning, religious meaning, spiritual meaning. And I had a really incredible dance teacher when I was on my Fulbright, who was actually teaching me a different dance style than I went to study. I sort of fell into it. I was studying Cavalo Marinho, which Lonica may have seen, or others that have been in Brazil, in northeastern Brazil. And he took me to an event that was in the rural part of the state. That's a very, very isolated community. And, you know, I had learned some steps in his class and, you know, I just fell in love with the dance style. But he was very clear when he was teaching us, and this is what was so amazing about him, about how it belongs to the community and how critical and upset he is about the fact that people from the cities are coming in and learning these dances and putting them on the concert stage and, you know, appropriating them in various ways. And so for me to show up at this rural event, you know, of course I didn't dance. I just stood on the side, but I had my camera and I was like, I want to capture this, but should I? I don't want to be that, you know, that white American who's there with my camera, but it's so beautiful and amazing and I don't want to forget this. And I mean, I think a camera is another thing we could talk about in relation to this. When do you pull out your camera, when do you put it away? But, you know, having him as a teacher really helped me tune into, you know, my positionality, how I could participate, how I could try to learn to embody some of the things that he was talking about, the cultural values that he was talking about, but at the same time, not take them on as my own, and understand that actually it is very separate from my own experience, but I could at least try to, you know, we're using the word empathy again, empathize in some way.
I was looking at the comments and I wanted to respond to that about getting consent and what is appropriate for. I think sometimes I have to work within what the IRB at my institution says, and There, it's not so much. So when I would give them consent forms, I would explain to them, I have to have you sign this so that I can use everything that we're talking about. I have to have your permission. And they would say, take it and go. Like, they wouldn't even read it. And they would often say, I trust you. I trust you. And that was it. But, you know, we still have to do what we have to do for institutions, those of us who are connected to an institution.
We had this problem in a previous project around children, and parents were really offended that we were blurring out children's faces from the pictures that were going to come out in the publication. They actually wanted their children to be seen. So it's a very cultural thing, and the idea of taking consent again sometimes has to be communicated in a very different way.
Yeah, I'm realizing now that this question should have been on the agenda because it's enormous and actually it could be its own workshop entirely. But this question about consent, yeah, is really important. And I in my research for my IRB, I really only need to get the interview portions through IRB, like any kind of like informal conversations, like taking a dance class and like watching other people's bodies, just watching, right? It goes through expedited review, right? It's something that, the IRB is like, yeah, that's great, whatever, like you're not going to put anyone in harm. But then when it comes time to actually write it up, I suddenly have these pangs of angst because I'm like, I'm only interpreting this through my own eyes, through my own body. Like, what did I see? Did I completely misunderstand? And I was burned when I was working on my dissertation because I sent a draft of a chapter to one of the community members that I had been dancing with. And she was like, I think you've completely misunderstood this. You've misinterpreted it entirely. And, this is kind of that in between. Like, I didn't need to get consent to participate in a class, but then I'm writing about it and, communicating about it with people afterwards. And I want to be as responsible as I can be. That
was probably helpful to you though, to have that feedback.
It was extremely helpful. And actually what I took away from it was, I had written something that I heard from one person, and then she was another person that had a different perspective. And so I had to not reconcile the two perspectives, but try to just juxtapose them and try to not even make sense of it, right? Not try to reconcile it, but just accept that like there are these different perspectives. And actually what was valuable about the dance community was that they were creating a space for different opinions about those sorts of things.
One thing I've done with cameras, I want to take a picture. Often I will travel to different places. I find one of the locals there. Usually one of my students would go with me, and I'd give them the camera. And they would know the appropriate time to take a picture or not. Usually I would go to their village, and they would know when that was okay. And I would say, can you get a picture of that? And they'd say, nope. Okay, how about this? Okay. So in that way, I was able to get a lot of, without having to ask too much. I could just be natural about things, and then a companion would be able to make the decision.
I think both, and checking, member checking with the community after you've taken pictures or taken notes. I think, like you mentioned, Kate, that was a wise thing to do, getting back to the community and showing them the pictures or talking them through your notes and saying, this is what I understood. I hope I've got the right perspective. Like you said, there may be more than one perspective, but at least having gone back to the community with your perspective, I think that does make a lot of difference and develops a lot of trust, helps the community develop trust on what your purposes are. I think that's pretty important in participant research, observation.
Well, when I take pictures, I tell everyone that everyone gets it. I will send a link to everyone for all the pictures. And it was only in my last trip to Russia when I was told not to do that, which started making me really nervous. Because they said essentially, with the government, you don't want everyone knowing everyone you talk to. And I go, okay. But usually, yeah, if I take their picture, they'll see it and they'll see everyone else's picture I took. I mean, I take pictures of dance groups. I'm not taking pictures of rocket installations.
Well, I also found myself in a space where I was, taking photos or in photos on social media with a group, and social media has just made this really difficult, right? Because we feel like we can take photos of anything and just put it up, and people seem like they're more open to it, but we don't know. And so I ran into a little bit of that too. I was blogging, I was on social media, and like, okay, do I put these kids on online or not? And so asking directly is the best way to deal with that, but it does cause a little bit of a gray area. Yeah, Heather.
I just wanted to say that one of the interesting discoveries I made with all the photographs that I had been taking in rehearsals and whatnot was that now that COVID's happened, the shows that people were going to do that I was working on got canceled. And I'm the only archival history now for the show that does not exist. And I'm in the process of trying to compile all these photos in a way for the community to use however they would like to use them. And I found that oftentimes people don't take enough pictures of what they're doing. The NGOs that I had been working with, they're hardly taking photos themselves because they're so busy on the ground doing the work. And just offering to give them the images that I took made them just so much more willing to have me have the camera around a lot more, because I was like, anything you want, anything you need for your own marketing, publicity, whatever you need, you can totally use it. And that was a way to kind of really endear myself to certain communities. And then another thing that happened was one of the groups I was working with, I mean, some of the women, they were exploited women. So I couldn't put their faces on social media. I really couldn't, I was so excited about the artistic work that we were creating, and you want to share it and you want to show it off and be like, look at what these amazing women are doing. They're not even professional actors and they're creating, but you can't, right? So what we ended up doing is I created a collage of images that we had taken when the women showed me around Marseille and in certain areas that they like, and then they would point and be like that and that and that, and I think, like somebody else was indicating, they start to feel a part of your research a lot more, even if it is just pointing in the camera in the direction that they find interesting. And I don't actually even know half the time what is so interesting, without asking them. And then after we put all of those images together, I created a really rough, I guess, collage video that I showed to a very small networked invited community when the women presented their performance. It was kind of like the pre-show audio-visual element to our production. And they were really blown away by it because they saw themselves on the big screen, and they saw themselves differently. So there was something about the process of them being model actors on camera willingly, and then having themselves be seen in that way, they felt like little starlets. That was sort of some of the feedback, is that they felt so special. And so it can kind of work, and it worked in my favor a lot, that here I was thinking I'm just taking research photos for my research, but it actually started to be very generative for the participants themselves to realize that they're part of a photography project now, and what it meant to them. So it was just this whole wonderful part of embodied research, really, that that I found particularly exciting.
Yeah, and I think, we talked about this in the last workshop a little bit too, is, what are the contributions that we are bringing to the communities that we are entering, right? And that's really central to the Fulbright mission, that we're cultural ambassadors. And so being able to say, whether it's in our proposal before we go or after we get back and we're writing it up, or not just writing it up, Gordon, doing whatever outcome our research comes up with, that we're contributing something to the community, and whether that's sharing back photos or sharing the research findings with the community, or sharing it with them before you put it out publicly to make sure to have a dialogue with them before it goes out. I mean, I think I think all of that is really crucial to what Fulbright is all about specifically.
You know, in addition to that, I think it's you know, and we talk about this a lot in the, excuse me. We talk about this a lot when we talk about research, but the ways that we impact the field, how the field is changed just by our presence there, and how it impacts relationships. Maybe they added something into the performance because they knew that we were looking and we were looking at a certain thing and they wanted to make sure that we understood that aspect of it, or the fact that the person who would have been participating in the dance is now not participating in the dance because she's assisting you and she wants to talk to you about certain things, or the kids who would have been running up the field, they're now talking to you about something. And then you look on Instagram and now you're in the picture with a camera and a baby, you know, so the way that we impact the field, the things that we give back as well, but understanding when we're looking back and writing that up and analyzing it, that we have had an impact on what we observed as well. It's not just completely, we're not just complete outsiders looking in. To some degree, we have now impacted what's happening there.
Yeah, and Janet Robbins, who is having trouble getting the chat out public, but she just wrote to me. She was a panelist at the last workshop, was in Brazil at the same time that I was, notes that finding a cultural insider is so important. And that does seem really key. And I think something that she talked about in the last workshop that was really important is not just, you know, giving back immediately after or during, but she's built long-term collaborations over many, many years, right? And so building these partnerships with the community, whether it's institutional or it's, you know, Gordon having, you know, developing these festivals over time, building these partnerships in order to give back, and, you know, so that both sides benefit in various ways. We have only 4 minutes left, so I think that we'll wrap it up with some closing thoughts. I know that we didn't get through every single question, but I think that we touched on everything that, you know, that I had wanted to talk about here.
It was very productive and very interesting.
Yeah, I really appreciate, you know, all of you panelists for coming in and sharing your experiences, and all of you that also have spoken about your research. And those of you that have been lurking, I hope that you have gotten something out of this, this workshop. So a couple of notes. Again, I will be sending out the video to everybody by tomorrow. And I'll send also a copy of the chat transcript so that, you know, you can look at some of the resources that were shared. Zoe, do you also want to share a little bit about the research space that you're building?
Yes, I mentioned it. I think I mentioned it a little bit in the beginning, but yes, I think this discussion has been fantastic. And so, like I mentioned before, we're making a research space, and our hope is to create a forum discussion where some questions about this could continue to be asked and people continue to talk about these issues. And so I'm hoping we can get that done in the next week or so, and then you all could be shared into it if you so desire and want to continue the conversation.
Oh, great.
Yeah, I'll send an email out to everybody. And also our next workshop, which will focus on interviewing, will probably be a natural development of this conversation here. So I hope that you all will be able to come. I'm planning to do it probably in 2 months. We're kind of spreading these out every 2 months. And we can keep these conversations going on the forum or by email, or if there's somebody that you want to reach out to, feel free. And if there are any specific issues that you would like to talk about in the context of this workshop, or you have an idea for another workshop, just let me or Zoe know. And we'll go from there. So the next one will be interviewing, and then we'll probably do one more after that about the outcomes of our research, whether it's a publication or a concert or a festival, or I don't even know all the other possibilities. So I would leave that up to you all to bring those ideas to the table.
Thank you very much. I thought it was great.
Yeah,
really
thank you all.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah.
Thank you for inviting me too.
Até logo.
Até logo. A lot of Portuguese speakers in here.
Entendo até logo.
Easy for you to say.
All right. Thank you all, and we'll see you next time.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Bye.